I will never be able to call this a hatchet. I can't. Ingrained in me not to. And I have a practical reason why I would not call this a hatchet. This is a hatchet. And I should explain some context first so that people don't think I'm being, a querulous or, to be described as contrarian would be a compliment to me. It just means that you hold an opinion that it's in opposition to a widely held popular belief. And I tell you where that comes from. Some of the older channel viewers will be in the same boat. We didn't learn about axes from the internet. We kind of did it in isolation at first, especially me. In fact, I was isolated from the rest of the world regarding axes for about 50 years. And that's why I have so many questions. Did I learn wrong? Was somebody who showed me wrong? So back up 50 some years ago, 12 years old, scout, go to the first big troop camp out. I have my tenderfoot. Now I qualify to use a knife, a bow saw, and an axe in camp if I have a tote and chip card. The tote and chip card is proof that I took a little course on the safe and effective use, most effective use of a pocket knife, bow saw, and a hand axe. And I remember when I came to that camp knowing I was going to do this, I brought the little scout axe. It would have been similar to this one. Though this one is not. This is not a plumb scout axe. It would have been similar though. I brought a little axe that was my dad's and I said, can I use my hatchet? And the instructor took time out and said, son, that's not a hatchet, that's a hand axe. And he held it up for everybody to see and he said, hand axe, we don't have any hatchets. I didn't know what the difference was. I knew then that's an axe. Why is that an axe? I don't know. Why is that an axe? He also had one of these. He didn't have a council tool, but he had a boy's axe, 28-inch handle. He did not call it a boy's axe either, but he was a professional axeman. I don't know of anybody else who insisted on nomenclature to be as distinct and purist as what he did, but he called it a 3/4 axe. This was a 3/4 axe. Well, because it's 3/4 of the length of a full felling axe, 3/4 of the weight. This would be a 2 1/4 pound head instead of 3 1/2, and a 28-inch handle instead of 36. So when you go do the fraction, you find out, oh, it's 3/4. Okay. So he insisted that that was a hand axe. I never thought anything of it. You got to skip ahead almost 50 years. During that 50-year time, I'm an axe nut. I fell in love with axes so much. Of all wood tools, that was my favorite. Pocket knives, I always carried a pocket knife. Still do. And I was known as being a little bit, off, a little bit of a nut, because if you needed a campfire built, my axes are really sharp. I'm very good. I sharpen them the way I was taught. And I would make the kindling and the tinder using my axe. And when it came time to cook, I don't have time to fool around with a pocket knife cooking. I got an axe. And so it would be clean so I could use it for cooking, but I'd slice tomatoes and chop vegetables and cut meat with my axe. And people think, well, that's kind of rustic. And I enjoyed being a little bit odd. Assistant scoutmaster, district commissioner, working in Boy Scout camps, and never thought anything of it. I didn't have a group I belonged to. I had the knowledge I learned as a child, and then for decades after, just carried. I mean, it's not difficult. Honey, it's a piece of metal on a stick. How much support group do you need for that? I'll get back to that. So I went on teaching it. You skip ahead, several decades. It's the COVID shutdown. My wife and I are binge watching a series on TV called Alone, because I have to watch some of her soap opera type stuff, and then she kind of liked it too, but she knows that I like the outdoors. I'm a hunter, a camper. I like to spend, and I wonder what's going on there. I wonder if somebody had a fire, got out of control. Anyway, we're binge watching Alone, I saw the axes that they were using, and one of them was a Grants Force Brook, so I got interested in that. And I thought it might be nice to have something, because I've only ever had garage sale axes, hand-me-down axes, and then on occasion, if I needed one, I'd go to the hardware store and buy a hardware store axe. I had a little collection growing of axes. So I was looking at these Grants Force Brook axes and thought I might like to have one. Went to put it on my wish list, the Amazon wish list, for Christmas, so that people could see it. Maybe they'd chip in and get me one. I didn't know how expensive they were, and I went like, holy cow! They want $230 for those things. And I can't do that to somebody. I can't make them pay 10 times more than what I would pay for an axe if I went in a hardware store. And so that was the beginning. Because this is the era of instant answers. You can look for that information now. Remember, it had never occurred to me to ever look for something about axes online. I knew there's not a whole lot to know. To use one of these, there's not a whole lot to know. So there was no reason for me to ever look up information about them. But I went online and I looked up information on the Grants Force Brook, and have since realized it's really a bargain. Every question leads me to another question. So I got interested in hatchets. I always thought I was always going to look into those. When I came to the internet and found out there's a whole bunch of nuts online that are just as crazy as me about axes, I joined everything. I joined all the forums. I subscribed to all the YouTube videos and stuff. Skill Cult, Kevin's Disobedience, and I watched Buck and Billy Ray. Everybody stumbles on his channel, the world's most famous axeman, East Coast Lumberjack. I was just eating it up. But I went to one axe forum and I asked a question about the metallurgy and the profiling of a hatchet. And right away people started giving me advice about hand axes. And they acted like I was brand new or something and trying to introduce me to axes. They went this far. That's not an axe. That's a hatchet. And so it kind of blew me away. Well, it's obviously an axe. No. I'm not talking about hand axes. I'm talking about a hatchet. The tradesman's tool. A hatchet, whole head is hardened. It's on a straight, short handle, so you can flip it around, index it in your hand. This side can be struck with metal. This side can strike metal. And I just could not. I just felt like I was swimming upstream. Everybody was telling me the little ones were hatchets. Now that's an axe. Okay, what is this? Again, it's an axe. It's for working timber. It's for chopping, splitting, and shaping unworked wood, like in the woods. And then the little one, same thing. It's the same kind of head. It's the same shape handle. It's just shorter, but it's the same class of tools, where the hatchets are tradesmen's tools. Carpenters use them, roofers use them, drywallers use them, lathing, the plasterers use them. You put those laths up, you got thousands of lath you want to put on a wall. You hold that over the stud, give it a chop, snap that off, spin it around, pound it in, next one. You don't have to reach for your hammer on the side, and you don't have to get a saw. Both sides are hardened, probably the whole head is hardened, and they're on a straight, short handle, so that I can use it just like a hammer handle. I can flip it around and use, and some of them have a claw on them. I can use the claw side or the side with the axe-like blade. Now, I have a lot of regard for the man that showed me axes, and that I carried that for decades. But I also consider myself to be a pretty reasonable guy, and simply saying he's an old dude, therefore he's right. It's not a very compelling argument. He's from the Forest Service, therefore he's right. That being from a government agency, that's not a very compelling argument either. One of my favorite arguments starting to assail is, well, back in the day. How do you know back in the day? Everybody talks about back in the day as if they were there. You weren't there. What authority was that? You know, a lot of the axes you pick up in some of these yard sales and stuff, you've seen the way they tried to attach the head to the haft. And that was back in the day. We'd never do that today. And old advice like soaking your axe in a bucket of water, I used to hear that all the time. My dad thought that's what you did to axes. You just soak it in a pail of water and your axe is working. So back in the day is not a compelling argument. I'm hoping to prove the distinction because I've always regarded them as two different classes of tools. Surely hatchets are something other than axes, and it's not based on just length or weight. Now I'm going to talk over myself here. I'm holding up a 16-inch handle with a 2-pound head on it. Is that a hatchet? Because that's a boy's axe size head. I think most people would call it a hatchet, but if I put a 3-pound head on an 18-inch handle, now people don't call that a hatchet, they call it a house axe. So from my perspective, that's extremely arbitrary because I'm a large man. That's a one-handed tool for me. Now I want to note how retailers separate the classes of tools in their stores. They put things where they think their customers are going to look for them. Hand axes, or what the people are calling hatchets, are with the axes and axe handles. Where do you find them? Typically, if you want one of these, call me, I'll make you one. If you want one of these, you would go to Lawn and Garden because they're going to be with the other axes and the replacement handles. So it's Lawn and Garden. In some stores, well, you might, if they have a sporting goods department, they might have put these over by the sporting goods. You know, like if you went to Walmart, you'll find it with the Ozark Trail stuff. If your hardware store sells these, and some still do, this is over by the hammers. This is over with the other construction and tradesman's tools. So pliers, wrenches, screwdrivers, hammers, hatchets. Okay, hatchets and axes have two different places in the store. But when did this distinction start? Because it was evident in the major manufacturer and retailer catalogs of the golden era of mass axe production. What is that? How many recognize what that is? It's a Plum National Pattern Scout Axe. How many times did Plum refer to that as a hatchet? Count them. It's going to be easy to count. In the entire length of that company's run, from start to finish, there are 0 instances of them ever calling that a hatchet. That's always an axe. He's got a point. The major American manufacturers of axes never called small axes hatchets. Ever. Plum, Collins, True Temper, earlier Kelly, Vaughn, always called them axes. They called them hand axes, camp axes, hunter's axes, belt axes, scout axes, never hatchets. Hatchets were a different category of tool. What's going on? You can do this for the rest of the evening. I've done it on numerous occasions. I've looked through archived catalogs and cannot find a reference. Well, stop. There is one. I have seen where they've taken an axe like this, right next to an axe like this, put them side by side. This one they called a hatchet, this one they called an axe. That was given to me as an example by somebody who said you can't say never, because here's one occasion when they did. But no, they were wrong for this reason. If you take this axe, but you treat it like a hatchet in manufacture, meaning harden and temper the entire head, the pole gets hardened and tempered. That's one time they switch over. In a couple of different references, you'll see that as an axe pattern hatchet. So they would call this one down here was a hunter's axe, and this one up here was a camp hatchet. And camp would be different than maybe hunting, because the camp one, you know, I get to use this as a hammer. I don't have to have a hammer and an axe. That's kind of cool. So you've got axe pattern hatchets. I mean, look how hard they go out of the way to distinguish one from the other. If that's hardened on both sides, that is a hatchet. On the other, did you hear what I just heard? If you go out of your way to make that distinction, you're already splitting hairs and the public cannot keep up with you. They are not going to catch on that a little thing that you've been calling a hand axe, now you call it a hatchet, isn't a hatchet. All of these are hatchets. They're used for hammering. They have hardened poles. I'm not going to throw in the towel yet. I've got it held in one hand. I'm ready to pitch it, but I want to make one more stab at this. How do other languages do it? Now, unless you're a polyglot, this is not a simple thing to test. You simply can't go into Google Translate, put translate from English to Russian and put hatchet in. You'll have no way of knowing if they gave you a word for a hatchet or a hand axe. So see, is this the Russian word for a hatchet, what I think of hatchet, or a small hand axe? Translate Google doesn't show me a picture. But now I use that word and look it up, and I get two images, a small one and a large one, both the same tools, just different sizes. Now, although I did that for a dozen languages, I have no confidence that I'm using the terms the way a native speaker of that language would use them. So I still don't know. Do they have two different words for an axe based on size? One language I do know better is Spanish. My wife is fluent in Spanish with a Mexico City accent, and my stepkids are Mexican nationals. So I know a little bit about Spanish, but even then it's Minnesota Spanish because they've lived here their whole life. This is in line what I saw happening with most other languages. And it was actually a Swedish video. A guy had posted, he mentioned real quickly, he goes, I don't understand why English has two different words for axe. In my language, you only have the one word. So that's why I went looking, how many other languages only have one word for axe? So I put three up here for comparison, and I want to make this very quick. In German, I wasn't really sure. It looks like axt is the main word for axe. And bile may or may not be, because like when you see at the bottom there, a lathing or drywall hatchet is called a Gipsberbile, a plasterer's hatchet. That's a different word than axe. They don't use axe down there for that. So they may have separated the classes of tools just like English did during that golden era of manufacture. However, if you look at the Spanish version, that's what I want to focus on right there. It's hacha. The axe is hacha, and a hand axe is hacha de mano. Or you could say hacha pequeña, small axe. When you get to hatchet, a different class of tool, it is achuela. So hacha achuela. All right, and then that brings me to the conclusion of this study. Do you notice what's happening in French? Because French and Spanish are very similar in how they treat words. A big axe is an ash, and a little axe, they do that French trick where you put et on a word. So it's ashette, ashette. That word entered our language at the same time as a lot of French words entered our language. In fact, the way I'm speaking English to you right now, what you're listening to, is hugely affected by French, specifically Norman French. Not just the words that we use, but pronunciation. Originally, English would have been very harsh and guttural, like Old German that it's based on. Would have been like Bergstadtgebrechen. But then it softened up because after the Norman conquest, William the Conqueror was not proficient in English. He spoke Norman French. High society imitated the nobility. Only little commoners spoke English. And during that time, we were flooded with words. For instance, the word mansion, if I understand correctly, only means house in French. But when the people speaking French referred to their mansions, what commoners saw were these big fancy houses. So in English today, we use the word mansion. It's a French word to mean big fancy house. Tons of words poured into our language that way. One of them is hatchet. Now you could do the same trick in English if you wanted to say it was a little axe. Could you not say that there's a felling axe? It's an axe. There's a medium-sized axe, three-quarters axe, boy's axe. It's an axe. But these little tiny ones that the scouts run around with,
Let's call those ones axolets. Now, why in the world would you invent an English word that is so close to the word that's already been adopted into English? So all this time I've been insisting that people call the little axe a little axe. When they call it a hatchet, that's precisely what they did.
But that brings me to the conclusion. Am I going to throw in the towel? No, but I'm going to stop playing tug of war with it. How about that? My instructor was right for his time. Born in 1939 or 1940, manufacturers and retailers were clearly distinguishing hatchets from hand axes. We established that. Manufacturers and retailers also introduced a problem, the concept of an axe patterned hatchet that was hardened in both the pole and the blade side. That muddied the waters because you have something that looks exactly like a small hand axe, but it is now called hatchets. So many of them entered the market as hatchets. We just call them all hatchets. And there may not be that many people left who ever knew there was a distinction, because people who don't have a passion for axes, they're all hatchets. They call them anything. Same way that people would call a gun magazine for a pistol, they'd call it a clip. They don't know any better. But if you're a teacher, if you're an instructor, if you're a trainer, if you're someone who's a very avid shooter, it's your passion, you would know the difference and you would emphasize correct nomenclature whenever you spoke. And that's the way I feel about axes. So for me, I'm back to the beginning. I'm never going to call a small axe a hatchet, but I am no longer going to insist that other people make a distinction, because turns out I can't prove to you that 800 years ago, 750 years ago, or 700 years ago, that term was being used to distinguish tradesmen's tools from small hand axes. That for some reason, by the 1840s, they're already distinguishing hand axes from hatchets. Hatchets are tradesmen's tools. But then that falls out of use. Why they did it? It has to be because the market was demanding it, because I just will always assert a manufacturer or retailer has no reason to be teaching you nomenclature. Their job is to sell. And you start calling magazines clips, they're going to put clip on the package. You start calling axes hatchets, that's what they're going to sell them as, whether they're hardened or not. It's whatever you're looking for. And they're going to put them where you're looking for them. And the reason I'm still going to call hand axes is twofold. That's the way it was ingrained in me from the beginning, and I'm most comfortable doing that today. It still hurts a little bit when I crack my teeth trying to pronounce hatchet when I'm holding a hand axe. And I cringe a little bit when I hear it. But I'm going to get over that. I'm going to work to get over that. And then the second reason is because I have both. If I didn't have both, there wouldn't be such a need to distinguish them. And then I know there's people that have just been itching. They've been dying to introduce all the exceptions to the rule. Is a rafting axe an axe? It's got hardened pole. It's whatever you want to do, you're justified. Because when I'm insisting that you call a big axe a little axe, when you call it a hatchet, that is exactly what you just did. You called it a little axe.